Imagine wanting to be better. Not just a little bit, but fundamentally stronger, more capable, maybe even transcending our limitations. What if someone didn't just dream about that, but actually laid out a whole philosophy for it?
It's a really compelling thought, isn't it? And it leads us straight into, well, one of philosophy's most talked about and maybe most misunderstood figures, Friedrich Nietzsche.
Exactly. Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling Nietzsche's big idea, the doctrine of the Superman, or Übermensch. And you, our listeners, sent in some great stuff, particularly from Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is really where this Superman idea, comes alive.
Yeah, and our goal here is really to get a proper handle on what Nietzsche actually meant by the Superman. We want to try and cut through some of the jargon, maybe the common misinterpretations, and see how it fits into his wider thinking. Hopefully give you a clearer picture of this fascinating and yet still really debated idea.
Okay, great. Let's dive straight in then. Now, before we even try to pin down this Superman idea, it feels important to understand the background, right?
Yeah.
What Nietzsche was reacting against. Your sources really emphasize his deep critique of Christianity and traditional morality.
Absolutely. He felt they were, in a way, weakening humanity.
Weakening how exactly?
Well, his argument, as it comes through in the material, is that by prioritizing compassion, pity, values favorable to the suffering and the meek, these older systems kind of suppressed qualities like strength, pride, a certain zest for life, you could say.
Okay. So he saw it as almost holding back human potential, preventing something truly exceptional from emerging.
Kind of, yeah. Like setting the bar too low, maybe. Focusing on alleviating weakness rather than cultivating strength.
Right. And that's the context for him calling for this new table of valuations, a whole new way of looking at things. So let's get to it. What is the Superman? Because I think most people hear Superman and they immediately think,
Keeps him flying.
exactly, not philosophy.
Yeah, that's the very first thing to clear up. The material you send is super clear on this. Nietzsche wasn't talking about some literal superhero. He actually said himself, and it's pretty stark, never yet hath there been a Superman.
Wow.
Naked have I seen both of them, the greatest and the smallest man. All too similar are they still to each other. Verily, even the greatest found I all too human.
All too human. That really says it all. So if it's not a super being, what is it? The texts talk about rearing the Superman, describing it as an act of modifying by means of new and higher values that become laws and guides. That sounds more like a project,
Yeah,
ongoing thing.
that's a great way to put it. It's more like humanity setting a new, much higher goal for itself. It's about the striving, the continuous effort to overcome our current state, guided by these new values that emphasize, well, power, growth, strength.
Okay, but what kind of strength?
Not just physical, though, that's not excluded. It's
No.
more about inner strength, vitality, resilience, the capacity to affirm life in its entirety. These new values are meant to be the compass for that striving.
And these new values are a direct challenge to the ones he saw around him, the traditional ones, the
Oh.
Christian ones.
Very much so. The sources point out he believed those values arose from what he called the resentment of the botched and the weak, basically a reaction against life's more powerful, affirmative qualities, strength, beauty, pride. He felt Christianity condemned these.
So he saw traditional morality as sort of flipping things upside down, penalizing the strong and elevating the weak.
That seems to be the core of his critique, yes. An inversion that he felt ultimately undermined human potential and life itself.
Which brings us back to his proposed new system of valuing. The text puts it quite bluntly. All that proceeds from power is good. All that springs from weakness is bad. Now that word power, it sounds potentially problematic. Are we talking political power, domination?
That's a really important clarification. While the language is strong, Nietzsche's concept of power here seems less about ruling over others externally and more about an internal force, a kind of life drive.
Like an energy.
Exactly. A fundamental drive for growth, for mastery, for overcoming obstacles, including your own limitations. Think of it as vitality. The Superman is described as the embodiment of this. The strong, mighty, and magnificent man overflowing with life and elevated to his zenith. The goal, the hope, the will of life itself.
Okay, so internal vitality, the will to flourish, not necessarily political control. Got it. Now, the outline also mentions we need to touch on related concepts to really grasp this. Order of rank, will to power, and the transvaluation of all values. Let's start with order of rank. Sounds hierarchical.
It does suggest a hierarchy, yeah. Though maybe not a rigid social structure in the way we might first think. The sources don't detail it extensively, but the implication is that individuals differ in their capacity for this kind of self-overcoming, this life affirmation.
So the Superman is at the top of this potential.
Represents the highest potential, exactly. The peak of self-mastery and self-creation. More of a philosophical or even spiritual ranking, perhaps, based on inner strength.
Okay, and then will to power. We touched on it, but it still sounds aggressive. Can we unpack that a bit more?
Sure. It's definitely one of his most famous and often misinterpreted ideas. It's not simply a thirst for dominance. Think of it more as that fundamental drive inherent in everything alive. The push to grow, expand, overcome resistance, become stronger, realize potential.
Like a plant pushing through soil.
That's a good analogy. The text mentioned moments of inspiration feeling like a tempestuous outburst of freedom, of absoluteness, of power and divinity. It emphasizes the creating, willing, evaluating ego as the source of value. So it's the will to become, to create, to shape oneself and one's world. Overcoming inertia, maybe.
An internal engine driving growth. And finally, transvaluation of all values. That sounds massive. What does that actually mean?
It's radical, no doubt. If the Superman is the new goal, then achieving it requires a complete reevaluation of all our existing moral values, our concepts of good and evil, right and wrong. Nietzsche believed the old system, the traditional one, needed to be overturned.
Overturned and replaced.
Replaced with a new system that truly affirms life, strength, creativity. Imagine taking values like humility or self-sacrifice, which are often praised, and questioning if they really serve life's highest potential. Maybe qualities like self-reliance, ambition, even a certain hardness should be valued more. That's the kind of radical shift he envisioned.
Wow, okay. So we have this ideal, the Superman, based on self-overcoming new values. How does one even start down that path? The outline talks about the path to becoming.
Right. The texts highlight a few things. One is achieving what he calls great healthiness. And this isn't just, not being sick.
More than just physical fitness.
Much more. It's described as stronger, sharper, tougher, bolder, and merrier than all healthiness hitherto. It seems to involve embracing the full range of human experience, the highs and lows, the good and bad, constantly engaging with life's difficulties and actually growing stronger through them.
Like building resilience.
Exactly, a kind of philosophical resilience. He talks about Argonauts of the ideal who are dangerously healthy, always healthy again, suggesting this cycle of challenge, potential breakdown, and recovery leading to greater strength.
Constantly pushing boundaries then. And what about this image of overcoming the thou shalt? That sounds dramatic.
It's a powerful metaphor. Nietzsche uses it to illustrate breaking free from the chains of traditional morality and social dictates. He talks about the spirit undergoing transformations. First, it's like a camel dutifully carrying the burdens of tradition, all the thou shalts, the external rules.
Just accepting the load.
Right. Then it needs to become a lion, fierce, independent. The lion confronts the great dragon named Thou Shalt, representing all those imposed morals and duties. And the lion roars, I will.
Asserting its own will against the rules.
Precisely. It's about seizing the freedom to create one's own values. Even saying a holy nay, even unto duty, as the text puts it. Rejecting external commands to make space for self-determination.
So the I will is about taking ownership of your values.
It's the crucial step towards becoming your own lawgiver, your own creator of meaning. There's a third stage, the child symbolizing innocence and new creation, but the excerpts focus heavily on that lion stage, that necessary break from thou shalt.
Interesting progression. And tied into this seems to be a rejection of what he calls backworlds. What are those?
He's very critical of any belief system, religious, metaphysical, that devalues this earthly life in favor of some other realm, an afterlife, heaven, nirvana, whatever.
Why?
He saw these ideas as stemming from suffering and impotence, a kind of escapism, basically, a weariness that wants to leap away from the difficulties of this world into a fantasy. He insists we must remain true to the earth.
Which ties directly into his famous God is dead statement, right?
Absolutely. If that traditional foundation for meaning is gone, then meaning has to be created here on Earth by us. We can't look to supernatural hopes anymore. The responsibility falls squarely on humanity.
So we have to find value in this existence, not beyond it.
That's the imperative. This earthly life is all there is, so make it meaningful.
Okay, so we've explored what the Superman is and the challenging path towards it. Let's clarify what it's not. The outline mentions the last man. It sounds like the polar opposite.
It really is. The last man is Nietzsche's nightmare vision for humanity. utterly complacent, seeking only comfort and security, no great aspirations. They say, "We have discovered happiness," and they blink, signifying this tiny, diminished existence.
No striving, just blinking contentment.
Exactly. Zarathustra is horrified by them, feels completely misunderstood when the crowd actually seems to want to become these last men. It highlights the stark difference. Superman is striving, overcoming. Last man is stagnation, the end of ambition.
A chilling contrast. Okay, and the Superman isn't just driven by resentment either, even though Nietzsche analyzes resentment in others.
Right, that's important. He diagnoses resentment, the resentment of the botched and the weak, as a source of traditional morality. But the Superman isn't meant to be fueled by that same negativity. It's supposed to come from a place of strength, of affirmation, creating new values, not just reacting against old ones, building, not just demolishing.
Okay. But what about the darker hints? The text mentions man as the cruelest animal, even the happiness of the knife. That sounds pretty harsh. Is the Superman meant to be cruel?
This is definitely one of the most difficult and debated areas. The texts, as you point out, have these jarring phrases. On one hand, there's talk of overcoming revenge. Your slaying, ye judges, shall be pity and not revenge. The focus is often on self-mastery.
So, not necessarily aimed at others.
The primary focus seems internal. However, you can't just ignore phrases like happiness of the knife. They suggest a potential ruthlessness, perhaps a willingness to discard conventional pity, to embrace harsh realities. It's a tension in the philosophy.
So, it's complex. It's not necessarily about inflicting pain, but maybe about a toughness that looks cruel from a conventional viewpoint. A willingness to make hard choices for the sake of this higher goal.
That's a very plausible way to frame it. The emphasis is on overcoming weakness, both internal and external, and that process might not always look gentle or compassionate by traditional standards. The self-overcoming is key.
Okay, finally, let's talk about living in anticipation. It feels like the Superman isn't someone walking around now, but more like a future possibility.
Exactly. It's presented very much as a goal, the meaning of the earth, something to be willed into existence. Zarathustra pleads, "Let your will say, the Superman shall be the meaning of the earth." It's aspirational.
A vision for humanity's future. And who makes this happen? The text talks about those who laboreth and inventeth to build the house for the Superman.
Those are the creators, the pioneers, the ones who forge new values, push boundaries, challenge the status quo. They're preparing the ground, creating the conditions necessary for this higher type of human to emerge.
Building the future, essentially.
Yes. And throughout it all, that constant refrain, remain true to the earth, reject the super-earthly hopes, find and create value here. The Superman is the ultimate expression of that earthly potential, now that the old divine justifications are gone.
Okay, so if we try to wrap up the key takeaways from this deep dive, the Superman isn't a literal superhero. It's more a philosophical goal, an ideal of self-overcoming.
Right. Creating your own values based on strength, vitality, affirming life.
It involves breaking free from old constraints, the thou shalt,
That's
and embracing the challenges of this world, this earth.
definitely a radical revaluation of what matters, focused squarely on human potential within this existence.
It's a demanding, future-oriented vision.
Very much so. It asks a lot.
So for our listeners thinking about all this, what resonates? Is this idea of striving beyond our current selves, creating our own meaning, compelling? Or are there parts that feel troubling, maybe?
And thinking about Nietzsche calling the Superman a lightning from the dark cloud man, a distant goal, what are the real-world implications today? Is pursuing this kind of great healthiness and self-created value system a path to genuine fulfillment? Or could it perhaps risk isolating us from common ground, from each other?
It's definitely a lot to chew on. This deep dive into Nietzsche's Superman, well, it really only scratches the surface. There's so much more depth there. We absolutely encourage you to go back to these sources, explore further, and continue your own becoming.